of how plants kind of assess and respond to their environment. And the other idea is just thinking about how plants move. So animals, including us, we have muscles. Pretty self-explanatory. That's how we move. But have you ever thought about it from a plant's perspective? Now, I know a lot of people say plants don't move. And if you sit there and stare at the average plant, you would say, well, they move in response to wind, right? I mean, the wind moves them, or an animal bumps into them, but do they actually move on their own is the question, like what we can do with our muscles. And so they do move, they just do it a little differently. And so I'd like you to kind of get out of your animal head and start thinking like a plant. Like, how could a plant accomplish some movements? And it turns out some plants can do very quick movements and they can do quick movements and slow movements. Some plants are more just slow. And that's the other thing about plants. In general, they have a different timeline than us. You know, unfortunately, if we can make it to 80 years old, we're considering that pretty good, right? Plants can live indefinitely if you give them the right conditions. They have an indeterminate life cycle under those conditions. And certainly if you've been in the some of the, the giant redwoods or the sequoias or there's some really old trees in Australia as well. I mean, thousands of years. It's just amazing. So you have to consider they have a slower timeline, so to speak. And so their movements might be slower as well. And that's what we tend to find with some notable exceptions. So how are they doing this though? Really, like, what is the mechanism to allow them to move? Well, we've already learned about one, turgor movements. All right, so turgor is referring to water coming into cells and tissues of a particular area of the plant body, and it causes a movement. So it's hydrostatic pressure, water pressure. We've talked about it with this idea of the guard cells surrounding the pore. And we'll learn a little bit more about guard cells in detail, but basically the way they work is kind of interesting. Let's say the guard cells have closed over the pore. When they're like that, generally they're not very full of water. The guard cells, they're pretty, what we say flaccid, which just means they don't have water pressure exerting against the cell wall. Then if the plant's like, you know what, I need to open my stomata, then what happens is they create a condition where water rushes in to the guard cells. And as that happens, it starts to press against the cell membrane and cell wall, all that water pressure. And that's what's actually causing the guard cells to bend away from each other and reveal the pore. So it's water pressure that adjusts, really strong water pressure, you have maybe 100% open. Little less water pressure, maybe it's 50% open. All right, so turgor movements. And so here we're at the cell level where we're talking about guard cells, and we can have turgor movements that can be fairly quick, actually. In terms of, especially if they're under drought conditions, they can close their stomata fairly rapidly. Often this kind of water pressure is what we call asymmetrical. That's not really the case so much with stomata, but it is over here where you have this idea of here's your main branch, and then here is the petiole of a leaf. And that is called pulvinous tissue, what we're looking at here. So this area here is called pulvinous tissue. It's often in a petiole. Sometimes it's in the actual leaf blade. It depends. So what we mean by asymmetrical is that you have one side over here, kind of the right side, has water pressure. And so this side over here has water pressure. Whereas the other side over here they say flaccid cells. So that means there's no water pressure being exerted against those cell membrane and cell wall of that tissue, that part of the tissue. And so if you can imagine that where this is pressure, not much pressure, it causes some bending action, okay? So that's a good strategy. It's pretty simple. They just have to have enough water in their body to obviously do this, but that's pretty straightforward. It's not very complicated. It's not a ton of energy expenditure.
So does the whole venous tissue, does that like help pull it and like close it?
No, this isn't anything to do with here. These are two different examples.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So the guard cells are, which they both look, I guess this one's a little more closed, right?
Yeah.
So this one is more open. So these guard cells are more turgid than these guard cells. And it's pretty symmetrical here. This one is an asymmetrical. This is like a leaf petiole, like a leaf stem. And so you're seeing here lots of pressure, and then on the other side, not much pressure. And that would cause a little bit of a bending of the petiole of the stem. And so I'll come back to this idea with the so-called pulvinous tissue. So that's one way, turgor movements, it's water pressure. The other major way is growth, which we tend, as an animal, we don't think that way. That's not how we think about movement. But really, plants are moving when they grow. Yeah, today's Friday. So I guess it was Wednesday, we were talking about how when the plant is experiencing drought, its roots will actually forage for water. And they do that through very rapid cell growth. And that causes the roots to grow further into the soil and move. So they're moving further into the soil. So that is movement, even though yes, it's growth, but it causes movement further into the soil as they seek out the precious water. So growth movements, cell division, elongation of the stem tip or the root tips. Often this can cause different growth rates. And I'll give you some examples as we work through this. One like major variation, that example I just gave with the plant going through drought, and it's the roots going, uh-oh, we got some issues here. We're running out of water. So the roots start to grow rapidly. And in compensation for that, the plant tends to tell the shoots, stop growing, right? I mean, if you're desperate for water, don't keep investing in your shoots. You want root growth because you're searching for that precious water. And so that's a big varying growth. Shoots slow down, roots speed up. But we're also going to see within one area of the plant body, you can get this varying growth rate. And I'll give you some examples of that soon. So we're going to come back to this idea of gravitropism and phototropism as we explain this varying growth idea. Okay. So this actually was done again with Charles Darwin. He was fascinated by how plants move. And what really caught his eye initially was like the Venus flytrap that can really close its modified leaves very quickly. But he also noticed that you can have these more slower movements. This is a very simple experiment where they had carbon like powder on paper, and then he watched the stem tip trace a circular pattern as the stem tip is moving, as it's growing. And now with videography, if you video the plant and then slow or speed it up, you can see this action. In fact, I have links to several YouTube videos through this slide set that I'd like you to watch on your study time, because it really does very nicely visually get you to see what we're talking about here. So they give it a fancy name, nuptation. That's just the spiraling movement that a lot of vining plants have. So if you are a vining plant, which means your stem is well adapted to find something and wrap around for support, well, you seek for that support. And so you're moving and you're trying to find a support near you that you can wrap around. And so here with the, like some kind of ivy, they have this going on. So that makes sense if they're looking for support that they need to wrap around in order to stay nicely upright, that they would have that kind of nutation movement. Here's another example, a nod, they call it a nodding movement, because when you watch this video, the plants actually look like they're nodding. And when they have this, what they did is they put seeds on this like gelatinous nutrient, and then because it's easier to video what's going on. And then they allow the seeds to germinate, and you'll see that as soon as the plant, the little embryo plant starts to grow out of the seed, it starts to like nod back and forth as it keeps growing taller and taller and taller. And they suspect, they hypothesize that they're doing that because normally seeds are in the soil, right? So you have, imagine you're a seed, you're buried alive. But all is not lost because you have the ability to germinate and grow. Well, you have the soil packing on you, right? What would be a good way to get through without too much damage? Well, if you start nodding your way through it, you're very gently loosening the soil above you as you continue to move and move. And it kind of just allows for the soil particles to part ways, like parting the sea, and then you can get up and out above the soil. So it's really quite a wonderful adaptation for the very young seedling to be able to gently move through the soil until they can get above. And so that this is a snapshot of the video. So again, if you just put these links into your browser, they should take you to a live link, our live video. So please do so. It's kind of a fun way to study. Okay, then we have this idea of phototropism and gravitropism. Tropism, the formal definition is that's it. The permanent movements resulting, I kind of take issue with the word permanent. So I tend to drop that myself. It's more movements resulting from external stimuli because it's not permanent per se. It's reversible. So I don't know why they have that defined like that. But basically that part of the word tropism, like phototropism, it's growth of a plant toward or away. If you're doing positive phototropism, or just, we tend to say phototropism if it's positive, you're growing toward light. And then gravitropism, growing toward gravity. So phototropism, putting that toward those two terms together. Here you have a plant where the light is coming from the left, striking the plant. You can see how it's bending. If you have plants in your windowsill, you probably have noticed this. I mean, even with squat plants, I can see my plants doing that. I have to keep rotating them so they don't get too skewed. And so that's, we say it's phototropism. If you want to be super technical, it's positive because it's growing toward the light. And it makes sense that well, let's think about that. So here you have all these leaves and they're starting to try to get their leaf blade kind of 90 degrees. So if the sunlight, if my hand is the leaf blade and the sunlight is my pen here, it's hitting at 90 degrees, right? The sunlight is hitting the leaf at a 90-degree angle. And they know, plant physiologists have done studies like what angle does the leaf blade have to be to maximize sun absorption? 90 degrees. So that's why they're bending toward unidirectional like that, because they're like, I need to get 90 degrees. I want maximum absorption of sunlight onto my leaf so I can do great photosynthesis. So that's why you have to keep turning your plant if you don't want it to be. So they discovered that phototropism happens due to the action of the auxin hormones. So auxins, we know, are generally at the shoot tips of, produced in the shoot tips. And so they did an experiment with Arabidopsis plants, which are tiny little plants. And this is what they got going on. So here is a little baby seedling. And if we zoom in to the shoot tip area, auxin's getting, so which way is the light coming? Unidirectional light. It's this way, right? It's coming from the right this time. All right, so you have to imagine the light is coming from that direction. And you can see how quickly it's so young and vigorously growing that it shows the effect very nicely here. They dyed the auxin hormone, and you can see with close-up that it has shifted to the dark side, hence Darth Vader. Because anytime I hear come to the dark side, I cannot not think about this because I watched Star Wars over and over with my boys. Didn't realize till I had children how often you like to rewatch things. When I was growing up, we didn't have that ability to, do that. So yes.
So toxins only move to the dark side in the shoots of this stem, or is that?
Yeah. In this case, with unidirectional light, you have to qualify it. Unidirectional light will cause it.
Unidirectional?
Unidirectional light. So what's happening is there's only light coming from this side. So it's a dark room that they did this experiment, except for like a spotlight that's shining from the right and hitting this side of the stem. So it's hitting here. And so what happens is the auxin gets stimulated by that unidirectional light, and it moves to the dark side of the stem and starts flowing down the dark side. Now, what it's doing is it's telling the dark side, grow, 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 grow. The lit side, the side that's actually getting hit by light, is slowing down its growth. So that's what we mean by varying growth or asymmetrical growth in different parts of the body. Yes.
Toxin, like, has a form of that is light or not light.
There's photoreceptors in the shoot tip that play a role in that, but I'm not going to go into detail on
Yeah, no,
that. But photoreceptors means it's a protein that has a portion attached to it that can absorb the light, and then it sends a signal. And auxin goes, oh, okay, I need to move over. So it's like we talk a little bit more about it in plant phys when we talk about signal cascades and how eventually the hormones kick in and do their job. So their job is to move over to the dark side and tell all these cells, you know what? You need to grow, 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 grow. We're going to slow down growth here because if you can imagine now, the dark side is getting stimulated to grow, 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 grow. The lit side, not so much. And you get that asymmetrical growth and the bending toward the light. Now, if it had light uniformly around it, it wouldn't do that. The auxin would just course down the stem symmetrically. But here it's an asymmetrical auxin stimulation, and auxin, as we know, causes cell growth. And so it moves over to the dark side. And I don't think Darth Vader ever really said we have cookies, but it's a nice thought, especially on a cold day, cookies and hot chocolate. So, any other questions on phototropism? So it's more complicated than what I'm telling you. There's a signal cascade that this class, we don't need to get into that, but it's a very nifty mechanism.
Light is like too bright, will it ever shift away from it? Or-
Oh, yeah, so too much of anything can be bad.
Yeah.
For plants too, and too much sunlight, believe it or not. And yeah, so you can have with too much sunlight, I've seen, it depends on the plant species, but I've seen, like, say it's directly above too much light, I've seen leaves go whoop, or they bend down to let the light just spill off them so that they're not getting too much light. And again, that's often turgor movements that will cause that. They're like, ooh, this is too intense for me. And they start to move so that their blades, the leaf blades, not 90 degrees anymore to the sun. Now let's go into the soil where there isn't sunlight, but there's gravity. So now, of course, if you are a plant, you have kind of you have an issue here because your stem has to do what we call negative gravitropism, right? It's got to fight gravity. It's to stay above the soil, stay upright, make sure its leaves can get access to sun. But if you are root tissue, you want to feel and grow into the direction of gravity because that means you're going the right way. You're getting into the soil, getting access to better water and minerals. And so gravitropism has been heavily studied, zooming into the roots. A lot of debate about this over the decades. And basically, what they're saying currently is that you have, did you look at that yesterday in lab where you looked at amyloplasts? Was that last week or this week? You looked at amyloplasts. So here's a root tip area, and you see all these little circles. Those are the amyloplasts that store, what do they store? What carb? Starch. They store starch. So, of course, they had to give them a special name. They call them statoliths. They're just amyloplasts. They're special amyloplasts. Really, though, what you see happening here is so this root is growing straight down toward gravity. You see how all the amyloplasts have pretty much gathered to the so-called bottom of the cell, right? But they're not at the top part of the cells, really? You see that? So what's happening here is these amyloplasts are pressing on that part of the cell membrane of each cell. They're pressing because they weigh, it's full of starch. And so it's pressing on here. That pressure is what is cluing in the root. Gravity's right, straight down, keep going, right? And so what they're trying to show here, and they've kind of darkened it to show that you have that varying pressure again on the cell membrane, so-called bottom part of the cell. And that's telling the plant which direction is gravity. Lots of debate over this over the years, but the data is starting to really support this idea. Here, this is negative gravitropism. If you lay a plant on its side like that in a pot, pretty quickly it starts to grow up because it's trying to fight gravity. Does not want to be laying on the ground. Yes.
If you do that, do its roots grow down?
Yes. You can't see it here in the pot, but yeah, so the stem's going this way and the roots are going. So here's another picture. So here's a root that has been experimentally put straight down, and they're not, oh, here they are. Here are the amyloplasts on the bottom part of the cells, so to speak. So that pressure is telling the plant that's where gravity is. I want to grow that way. But you're also seeing IAA, by the way, that is a type of auxin. That's one of the auxins that the plant makes. It's called indole acetic acid. That's why they IAA. So here, if the root is straight down growing toward gravity, they're trying to show that IAA is coming from the stem down into the roots. And there's a word for this. Something like upside down fountain, because it kind of looks, the IAA comes down and then just goes whoop, back up, and you're seeing here kind of even amounts. It flows down and then it goes back up the root. Here though, the way the artist drew it, if you put a root experimentally on its side, instead of having the IAA come down and just symmetrically flowing back up, the artist drew a darker line here, which means there's more auxin flowing on the side closest to, gravity pulling. So do you see how the amyloplasts are shifted a little bit here? So again, they're on the bottom side, and that pressure is telling IAA. Now this is weird, because I've been telling you IAA stimulates growth up until this point. And normally it does. At higher concentrations though, in root tissue, it actually tells roots slow down. So we learn that very often how hormones behave the actions the hormones cause in the shoot and leaves can often be very different than the same hormone in the roots. So again, living your life so differently in the soil and then above the soil, it kind of forces a situation that sometimes you have to have those two parts of your body act differently. And so in this case, IAA in the roots at higher concentration actually suppresses growth. So now if you can imagine these cells on the lower side of this horizontal root, these cells are slowing down their growth. Whereas the cells up here on the upper side, they're speeding up. So that would cause, if you have growth, it would cause this bending down behavior. All right. So it's complicated. Sometimes these hormones act differently in the root versus the shoot and vice versa. Okay. But it gets the job done. It allows for the root to start to curve and grow, you know, more toward the force of gravity. And the so-called statoliths, which are just amyloplasts, are really helping the plant figure out the force of gravity. So this is again, this idea of gravitropism, positive gravitropism growing down. So again, we can say that it's uneven distribution of auxin that's allowing for this to happen. So this varying growth rate or this asymmetrical growth allows for, in this case, the root to bend, or in phototropism, it was the stem to bend. Okay, so and hormones usually are part of that signal cascade when you have this asymmetrical growth pattern going on. Okay, here's a fancy word, thigmotropism. Thigmo, if you look up that part of the word, means touch, to touch. So growth response to touch. Here they're showing, I think there's some pea tendrils. That's what those are being shown. And if you have ever grown peas or morning glories or something like that, they'll grow. If you put a stake in your garden for support, they'll do that nuptation movement until they feel the support, and then they'll start wrapping around it as they continue to grow.
So wrapping around like that shape that it's like the curls that it's making, is that something that's done like through auxin too?
Yep.
Or-
You got it. And so here we have this asymmetrical growth of the tendrils. So let me show you the next picture because I think it's a little less busy and a little easier to see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here you have the tendril wrapping around this branch stake. So now what you see happening here, so if you look at right here, let's look here. So there's part of the tendril that's making physical contact with the branch, and then the other part isn't, right? All right, so what's happening is these cells that are making physical contact with the branch, they perceive that touch. And they're like, okay, I'm on a branch. Now I want to use that to provide support for my shoots and leaves. So what happens is the cells that are making physical contact, or I should say that part of the tissue that's making physical contact, they slow down their growth. The part that's not making contact speeds up its growth. And that's what causes the coiling. And it's also auxin stimulating that, auxin's going, okay, this side grow, the side that's making physical contact don't grow so fast. And if you can imagine that happening, slower growth on the side that's touching, faster growth, it's not touching, it does cause that wrapping.
Auxin for aerial roots of pothos. Like I have one in my room, when it touches the wall, no, like burial roots, they get really big. Or like to latch on the wall. Compared to ones that are not.
Yeah, so they're doing that thigmotropism for sure. They're. What's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me, but yes, you're right, you got it.
I have a quick question. How do they stay so strong? Like those vines and like the way that like the little stringy things come off? How do they stay so strong?
Sometimes they have adventitious roots, like I've seen a lot of vining plants that will form adventitious roots along their vine and stick onto like brick walls, I've seen.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, how do they like cling on that tight? And then
Yeah.
when you go to rip them off, it's like, why are you stronger than I am?
I know, it's usually little stubby adventitious roots that are causing. it. And then, sometimes we grow pea plants for different experiments and, sometimes the prepper doesn't know that if you plant all the pea plants right next to each other, they start to just get so tangled up with each other.
Those advantageous roots that like cling to it, are they kind of like the root hairs in that they're small and see in little places and.
Not that small, not like root hairs. They're bigger, they're chunkier than that and a little bit more structurally strong. Yeah.
Are they able to stick by like sneaking into like small pieces?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they can get into little nooks and crannies. And then they also secrete like mucogel, they call it, that can help them kind of stick. Kind of like, have you seen video of like is it geckos? When the pads of their feet, toes? That's so cool. Wasn't there a toy like that? Did you ever have a toy when you were a kid where you could slam it across and then it go, yeah, I love that thing. I liked it better than the boys did. They're like, all right. Okay, here's another one. Seismo nasty. Sounds a little bit risque. Seismo nasty. So this is the idea, seismo. What does a seismograph use to measure? Earthquakes. So think about that. Plant getting shaken, disturbed. And these are excellent examples of that. So here we have, you know what this plant is? Sundew, beautiful petite little plant. What's this one? Venus flytrap. This one's probably not so common. Sensitive plant?
I don't know, I would call it that.
Yeah, that's one of them. The genus name is Mimosa. Which I like that. But it is a sensitive plant, or some people call it the shy plant or something like that. So, okay. So now seismonasty, we're not really talking about an earthquake per se, but if you think about this idea of the fly landing on the sundew or on the Venus flytrap, the plant can pick up that it's getting walked across, right? It can also pick up, so maybe a debris fell onto this, or a little tiny twig fell into the trap. It can tell, okay, something is landed on me, but it's not moving. It can tell the difference. And so if you try to trick a Venus flytrap and just like drop a twig in there and you want to see it close, it probably won't, because it's like, I don't care about a twig. It's not moving. That's not what I want. But if you put a juicy fly there and it's alive, and I did this with my boys, they had great fun with this. My cat liked to catch flies and play with them. So then we would watch the cat hunt the fly. We captured the fly before he killed the fly, dumped it in our Venus flytrap, and then as it's staggering around, the Venus flytrap would close over. But it had to stagger around, and it had to hit two little trigger hairs that are in the opening. There's all these little trichomes that are called trigger hairs. And if the Venus flytrap gets two trigger hairs touched within 20 seconds, it'll close. So that's why they say plants can count, because they can tell the difference between a twig that doesn't move and something that's moving and triggering their, touching their trigger hair.
What's the difference between seismonasty and then well, is it
Big motrophism.
Is it, so big trophism is it like plant touches something and it's like stationary and then
Yeah.
would this one be something touches the plant and it's like moving?
Yeah, you got it. So. Do you know why, by the way, Sundew and Venus flytrap really want to be able to tell the difference between an insect and a twig? Why do they want insects?
It's because their growing environment usually has a lack of nutrients, so they need the nutrients from the insects, and if they spend the energy trying to capture like a non-insect, then it's bad.
Waste of energy, right? You got it. And so, insect exoskeletons are full of nitrogen. And that's one of the main things they're going for, because do you know where Sundew and Venus flytrap are adapted to? What kind of habitat? Bogs, right? And bogs are notoriously poor in nitrogen. And so if a nice juicy fly lands there, they'll definitely count and pay attention and capture it. Now the mimosa plant, you see as someone's touching, we call those little things leaflets. It's not a leaf. Each one of these is a leaflet, and then this is a leaf. Okay? We'll talk more about that when we get to leaves, but anyways, you touch a little leaflet and it starts to very rapidly fold its leaflets up together. And then the plant will also like dip its whole leaves down. So it'll fold up those little leaflets and then dip the leaves down. So imagine you're a mimosa and you have a fly, or no, not a fly. Let's go for let's go for a tiny caterpillar. All right, caterpillar lands on you. What do caterpillars like to do when they get on a leaf? Yeah, you don't want that. So it makes sense that you would sense this caterpillar and go, uh-oh, and fold up to create less surface area, right? And then why would you dip down? Make it fall. I've seen video, I think it was Sir David Attenborough video, and it was just hilarious because in this case, I think they deliberately put a fly or beetle on it. And then the beetle like rolled off, and then kind of, you could swear the beetle was like, what happened there, you know? And then it wandered away. It's like totally like disoriented. And so they do think that all of that is to try to get the predator to, you know, get confused and move away.
So like the carnivorous plants, I understand like, they spend that energy and they make it up. And so how like the caterpillars and stuff like that detrimental to the plant that they like evolved to.
It
like, grow
depends.
up? Because like, I just don't get how that's saving them more than it's like hurting them in terms of like. energy.
Well, they're getting rid of the caterpillar, which is good because the caterpillar is trying to eat the plant. In that regard, yeah. So, if you are stationary, if you're a plant, you can't move away from your predator. If you can move to disorient or, shake them off, so to speak, or the other option would be pump out some nasty chemicals, start making some chemicals that could poison the pathogen of some sort, whether it's an herbivore or a fungus or whatever. So seismonasty is response to contact or mechanical disturbance. So think about, earthquake idea. And by the way, these are pretty easy to grow if you ever are interested in this. And they do form these lovely little pom-pom flowers. So they're a fun plant to have at your house. Just be kind to it. Don't constantly touch it because it's draining. And so if you do that, it's very fun because you'll see them fold up, but then it takes a while for them to unfold. And if you just keep doing that too frequently, it's not so nice. So be nice to your mimosa. So here is a wild patch of mimosa mixed in with some other plants, some other broadleaf plants. So, if you look carefully, here's some broadleaf plants in here below there, and then all the lovely mimosa. So here is before getting disturbed, and here is after. You can barely even see the mimosa plants now. You see that? That's them right here, but you just see like their stems because they folded up their leaves so tightly. So think about that. If you have something crawling on you, that would be a pretty good strategy.
So when it gets disturbed, is it just the leaves that were disturbed, or does the whole plant? All of it?
The leaves, the leaflets fold up and then the leaves themselves, right in this area, they tend to bend down. The stems will stay pretty much the same
But
orientation.
I'm like, do all of the leaves do that on the whole plant?
Yeah, so in this one, what they did was, I think they disturbed it with a brisk wind. You know, so that it was still, and then they blew a fan over it to try to show the disturbance. So it was a massive disturbance that caused that. So that's a good question, like, you know, if it, like, it wouldn't be very adaptive to always close up at any little touch, right? And I don't know that they've looked into it that carefully with this plant, because yeah, this is a natural setting. It's gonna be touched by other things and that aren't dangerous. So I don't know if they have investigated that. I wondered that too, because there's gonna be even like a soft wind could get a neighbor plant to touch the mimosa, so.
To like the way they made it all, which is like a big gust of wind.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll do that, you know, when it, with wind, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know how much research has been done on mimosa. We'll have to see. Here's a close-up of just touching one little leaflet gets the whole leaf. It's like this chain reaction. It's really, so there's a video you can watch. There are a couple different options when you're studying. And then the Venus flytrap, of course, with those modified leaves. And the sundew plant. The sundew is very well adapted to attract. So those glistening drops in the sunshine, if you've ever had your nose down at the base of a bog, the sphagnum peat moss, and you found a sundew plant, it's always fun to find them because they're so petite. It's like, I found one. And then you see these beautiful, especially on a sunny day, they just glisten in the sunshine. You can imagine how a fly would be attracted to that. And then they can, it's sticky enough where it traps the fly. All right, here's another idea. Big long term. Phygmomorphogenesis. Phygmo is touch. Morpho is your body shape. And genesis is to create. So creation of a body form in response to touch. Creation of a body form in response to touch. So this is different than seismonasty because you have a shift in the morphology of the plant. So now, here are two plants that were purchased identical to each other. And one was touched on a regular basis and the other one was not. What do you think? If you were constantly getting, not like just touched, you can just like run your hand over it. So if you were getting touched frequently, like several times a day, weeks on end, what do you think you might do in response to that? Yeah, you might like, I don't know, I think I need to stay low and strong. Because I keep getting touched and, you know, bent around and you don't even have to be that rough with it. And that's what they did with this experiment. They left that one totally alone in still air, just still. And then the one on the left, it was touched 2 times a day, I think for 2 weeks. Identical plants at the start. So that's morphogenesis. It created a shorter body form in response to touch.
So this is similar with like the theory of music and vibrations causing.
So yeah, I talk about that in my advanced botany class quite a bit. We get into Because there was that book that was published a long time ago where it's kind of folklore now that, plants like music. It's not the music, like they don't have a taste for Led Zeppelin versus Bach, but it's the frequency. It's the frequency and the loudness of it too. The pressure wave it causes across the plant. And so, but yeah, that's a very fascinating because along the whole plant's body, they have touch receptors. They have tons of touch receptors. And when they discovered that, they're like, oh, wow, all these touch receptors. But it makes sense if you're a stationary plant that can't move away. You need to know where you're being touched, who's touching you, and what to do about it. And so they're just full of touch receptors along their whole body. All right, I guess we got to stop there. Thank you for your patience. And we'll continue on with this on Monday.
Yeah.